What's up, everybody? Good afternoon. Happy Saturday. Hope you're having fun. And we got some extracurricular activity to go over here because I know that if you're a Seahawks fan and you're plugged into this stuff, you thought about it for at least a minute. I've been asked about it a couple times in streams. I know Brandon's been asked it a couple times in streams. So it's something to talk about. And it makes sense, right? This is something you want to at least think about. Whatever situation your team is in, you want to at least think about it. So, yesterday we got this tweet, and this report was backed up by various other sources. It sounds like Brian Burns is practically a lock to be traded before the NFL trade deadline. The Panthers are terrible. They just fired their coach. They are going towards another rebuild. They're going to have to try to find another quarterback probably because they have a bunch of different quarterbacks on that roster and none of them look promising for the future. Their bell cow running back struggles to stay healthy. It's just bad. Everything in Carolina is bad. And when you're bad, you sometimes have to give up on stuff that is good. There are a couple of babies in that bathwater, but sometimes you got to throw the baby out too. You just have to. Or at the very least, sometimes you would prefer to, just to completely turn the page. And that's what's happening here, it looks like. Brian Burns has been a great player since he came into the NFL. He's been everything the Panthers could have hoped for when they took him in the middle of the first round. And he's only 24, hasn't gotten paid yet, although he is about to. And now the Panthers are probably going to trade him. If the reports are true, they're almost definitely going to trade him. And given the fact that the Seahawks are a team that is building to try to be great in future seasons, 2023, 2024, and given the fact that our pass rush, our defense in general, but really our pass rush is just not what we want, people are going to talk about this. So let me say the minimum. Let me say the obvious here. Brian Burns is an excellent player. He's young. He's probably going to get better in the coming years. Very good chance of that anyway. He was a blue chipper coming out of the draft. He was a blue chipper now that he's in the NFL, and he's a blue chipper now. So adding a player like Brian Burns is certainly worth talking about. And in a vacuum, if you were to ask me in general, do you want Brian Burns? I would say absolutely. He addresses a need, and he's a great young player who should be good for years to come. But the devil is in the details here, and there's a reason why this tweet specifies traded before the deadline. You're not going to get this guy for nothing. Brian Burns, like I said, he was a middle first-round pick, had a very solid college career at Florida State, and since he's gotten into the NFL, he's been nothing but solid. Rookie year, 7.5 sacks. 9 sacks and 9 sacks the next 2 years. He made the Pro Bowl last year. So far this year, he's probably been the best player on that team with 4 sacks in 5 games. This is a really fantastic player. He's played multiple roles in Carolina. He's done some linebacker work. He's done some defensive end work. He's, I believe, only 250 pounds right now, or at least that's what he's listed at. So he can do the things that you want a outside linebacker to do, at least physically. So whatever your plan is with the defense going forward, it's workable. All this to say that every team in the league should be in on a potential Brian Burns trade. This is not a player that nobody knows about. This is not a player that nobody is aware of. Everybody's aware of Brian Burns. You're not going to sneak anything under the radar with this guy. This guy's a young elite player on the upswing of his career. He's 24. Every reason to believe he's going to get better. He's played almost every game in his career. He's missed, I believe, 1 game in his NFL career. Like, he is doing everything that you could want from a player, more or less. He hasn't had that 15-sack season yet, I understand. Some of that's probably because he's not on a very good team. The elite teams that force opponents to throw the ball a lot because they're ahead constantly, if you put him on a team like that, he might get you that double-digit sack season. He might get you that 15-sack season. Hasn't happened yet, but I think we all understand there are extenuating circumstances there, and that Brian Burns is definitely better than his stats even indicate. I think that's actually very fair to say. So, for these reasons, if you want him, it's going to cost a lot. And let's talk about what a lot might mean here. Let's go back to the Frank Clark trade. This was one of the most recent instances of a young, good pass rusher getting traded for draft picks. And we know what we got because we were on the opposite side of the deal. We were on the side of giving up Frank Clark. Gave up a first-round pick, swapped third-round picks, and gave up a future second-round pick, did the Chiefs, to get Frank Clark. Now, if you subscribe to the theory that a second-round pick in the future is like a third-round pick now, you're basically looking at a first-round pick plus a third-round pick for Frank Clark. Now, Frank Clark, when he got traded, was coming off that monster season where he had, I think it was like 13 and a half sacks or something like that. So maybe you would say that Burns isn't going to be quite as valuable, but I don't think so. I think this guy's every bit as valuable. So, for starters, if you want to do this, you're going to have to probably give up assets in a similar realm. First round pick plus, honestly, so many teams are going to be in on the Brian Burns bidding. It might even go up to like first plus second. But let's say it's just a first rounder for a second here. Let's say it's just a first rounder. You look at our first round picks next year, they both have a chance to be very high. The Seahawks have one of the worst defenses in the league, and the Broncos have one of the worst offenses in the league. And the Broncos are the most injured team in the league. They have the toughest remaining schedule of any team in the league. Like, you look at those two first round picks, they are very, very juicy. So I'm not really looking to give those up for a guy who's already been in the league a few years. I'm just not. 24 and a half years old is nice, but I'm also looking at it as, what am I giving up? The opportunity to get a player with maybe even more upside who is also a few years younger. Yes, there's a risk, but also don't forget the benefits of having to have them on a rookie deal for several years. So here's what I would say. Our second round picks also look like they're going to be juicy. Our second round pick, Broncos' second round pick, they both look like they're going to be really high. Maybe the offers aren't there for Carolina. Maybe the big offer isn't there, which, by the way, I really think it will be. Somebody's going to give up a first and a third at least for this guy. Maybe the offers aren't there. Maybe the Seahawks say, hey, second round plus fourth round pick. And maybe the Panthers are desperate to move him, right? Because that's what the tweet implied. He's going to get traded. Like, they really want to trade this guy because they just don't want to have to pay him a bunch of money when they're going through another rebuild. I personally wouldn't do that. If I were in charge in Carolina, I would view this guy as one of my blue chippers for the next good Panthers team, like we did with Metcalf. But I can understand why there's some trepidation behind committing a bunch of money to him or any player with the situation that team is in right now. I get it. But if you could get the Panthers to desperately sign off on a second round pick, either of our seconds, and maybe like a fourth round pick for Brian Burns, okay, now we're getting somewhere. This is going to be one of those instances where I say, you make some calls, you see what's going on. If the Panthers want full value for him, you say thank you but no thank you, and you hang up. You don't chase this the way you chased Jamal Adams. No, you do this the way you did Clowney. When you traded for Clowney, you clearly were willing to wait things out a little bit because it ended up being like a third-round pick and two marginal players. If you can play the Clowney game with the Panthers, then do it. But if they want full value for this guy, what he's actually worth, I just don't think you can do it right now. But if that happens, what then? Because I'll tell you what happens then. You have to pay Brian Burns. You have to give him big money because he's entering next year will be the fifth year of his NFL career, so he's able to hold out for a contract if he continues to have the big year that he was starting in Carolina. Like, let's say he gets to the trade deadline and he has like 7 sacks, and then he goes to Seattle or wherever and gets another 6 sacks. 13 sacks, he's going to want that extension. He's going to want a lucrative extension. There's no way he's going to be willing to play out a fifth-year option. Or if he is, he's not going to be doing it willingly. He's going to be doing it grumbling to himself about how garbage it is that he can produce like this and not get paid. So you're probably going to have to just pay him. And what kind of money are you going to have to pay him? Well, if you take a look at the top edge rushers in recent years signing the big contracts, okay, he's not as good as TJ Watt. He's not as good as Bosa or Myles Garrett. He's not Khalil Mack, and Khalil Mack actually signed that deal several years ago, so good for him. But Max Crosby, all right, Max Crosby. This guy signed a big extension with the Las Vegas Raiders this most recent offseason. And what had he done to earn that? He had had 3 years. He had made 1 Pro Bowl, just like Brian Burns. He has played in every game. Brian Burns has only missed 1 game. He had a 10-sack season in 2019. Okay, Burns has gotten to 9 sacks twice. And you can see, he hadn't had the monster year yet either. He hadn't had that one super 15, 16 sack year yet either. He had been solid for 3 years. In fact, if you were to add up his totals over the first 3 years of his career, you would come out to 25 sacks. You look at Brian Burns, he's at what, 18? No, excuse me. He's at 25 and a half. So very, very similar stuff. He had made 1 Pro Bowl the year before, just like Burns did in his 3rd year. And what did Max Crosby get? He got 4 years, $94 million. And given the fact that the cap is going up, and you know these players are going to ask for more, I think you're looking at 4 years, $100 million for Brian Burns. I think that would be the likely extension that he wants after this year, and the one you would probably end up needing to give him. So not only are you having to give up that theoretical 2nd and 4th round pick, which I can live with that, but you add the money to it, and I think I'm going to just take my chances in the 2nd round of the draft getting a player who's going to be cheap for 3 to 5 years. Well, 3 to 4 years, even if he's really good. So that's kind of where I have to pause and wonder, do I really want to make this commitment? If we did it, I would not hate it, that's for sure, because he's a really good player. There's no way I would hate it. Adding a player like Brian Burns, it can't be that bad. But if you're talking about giving up a high 2nd rounder and probably a high 4th rounder, which is low, by the way, let me be very firm about that. More realistically, you're talking about a 1st round pick minimum, and our 1st round picks look really, really juicy. And then you're giving him a 9-figure deal, $25 million a year. I'm tempted, but I personally would say there's probably a better way to use those assets. Admittedly, like I said, if we did it, I would be excited in my own way because he's a blue chipper. Very good player. Very capable player. I would not get on here and be sad that we traded for Brian Burns. God, no. There's nothing to be sad about when you get a player like Brian Burns. But I don't know if it would lead to any, kind of a Super Bowl caliber team. I don't know if it would lead to greatness. I don't know if it would be the difference maker for us between us being just mediocre and us being really good. It is tough, though, because we struggle to draft pass rushers sometimes. Frank Clark's been one of the few guys who's been good for us recently. And we see what's going on with Darrell Taylor. And Darrell Taylor is a great example of how you can feel as good as you want about a pick, a rookie player. You can feel as good as you want about a draft pick, but there's no guarantee it pans out. And Brian Burns, you have a pretty solid guarantee that he is going to work out because he's done nothing but work out so far since he came to the NFL. So those are my Brian Burns thoughts. What do you guys think? Would you be willing to give up the massive picks for him? Would you be willing to give up a 1st rounder for him? Would you be willing to then give him $25 million a year? I understand that the salary cap is something that can be worked around, but it's not infinite. You can't do it endlessly. So I look at something like that and I go, okay, if you're going to do that, we need to try to win the Super Bowl next year when this contract starts. So do you like the odds of the Seahawks being able to win the Super Bowl or even contend for it next year? You got to do a lot of other things right. It's a difficult path you're going to start walking at that point. But hey, great player, no doubt about it. Great piece that I would love to have. But those are my thoughts. See you guys later. Go Hawks. Have fun watching college football, and let me know what you think about old Brian Burns.